Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. This is the last day of the SM IT Asset Management BCS Group conference, and we've had a really good couple of days so far. And so, don't worry if you've missed out. We will be putting the presentations. We've been recording the presentations, and we will be publishing them very shortly. So for today, we've got Hannah Price talking about hero culture this morning. Hi,
Hi,
Hannah.
Kylie. Hey.
And then this afternoon, we've got Oliver Cronk talking about, I've forgotten the name of his presentation, but it's architecty type stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that, actually, because Oliver's also a really great speaker. And then this evening, we have a panel session with as many of our speakers as could possibly make it. So if you had any burning questions that you weren't able to ask during one of the actual live presentations, then this evening is your chance to ask them as well. So Oliver's on the call. No, Marilyn said to me actually, Oliver's title is The Evolution of Business as Usual, which I think is a fantastic title. So, right, so just a reminder that the hashtag for the conference, if you want to tweet stuff, is SMITAM, so S for sugar, M for mother, ITA, M for mother, conf. So that's an F for Freddie at the end of that, 2020. So SMITAM Conf 2020. We also have a LinkedIn group that you might like to join if you want to hear more about our events, which we run regularly. And you can also email us at sm-itam@bcs.org. So Marilyn has very kindly put all of those contact details in the chat box. If you want to take them down and get in touch with us, would be great. So that's it from me, really. Just a very quick introduction. Many of you have heard it all before, of course. And I'd just like to hand over to Hannah, who was talking about hero culture as a damaging mentality for teamwork and success. And I'm so pleased that we're touching on this topic because it's something that, do you know what, as a woman in IT, I've found that hero culture mentality really difficult to deal with over the years. This sense that it's perfectly normal and accepted and expected that you'll stay up an entire night to repair something that's gone wrong, that if only they'd done it properly in the first place wouldn't have gone wrong. I find very frustrating and also quite damaging to people's careers who just can't or are not willing to be that stupid, to be honest. Can I say that? Anyway, I will now dismount my hobby horse and hand over to Hannah. So over to you, Hannah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kylie. Well, hi, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure today to talk to you on hero mentality and about how when it can become a dominant culture, as Kylie rightly says, it can be quite damaging. And it felt wrong to talk about heroes and hero culture without first of all saying that I love a hero movie. I don't know if you guys at all do as well, but anything Marvel, DC, I love going to the cinema and seeing it on the big screen with the special effects. The story of the adventure has always absorbed me. But I noticed something in quite a few of these hero movies, and I wondered if you've ever noticed this as well, is that in a hero movie, they never really fully address that there's always like a massive amount of damage usually done to the city after the hero saves the day. It's quite funny really because like obviously the day is saved, which is great, but the smouldering wreck of the city is just kind of ignored. And I was looking into it, and just in the Marvel universe alone, they have this awkward habit of kind of wiping out whole cities completely. And there's actually a list that you can look up of all the cities that have completely destroyed in Marvel movies, which is obviously quite funny to think about from the Marvel universe perspective. But there's actually some parallels that we can draw to our own real universes as well. Hero culture, without realizing it, could be destroying your own city, your own organization, and can be damaging for teamwork and success. So my name is Hannah, and as I said, it's my pleasure to speak to you today. By way of introduction, I live in Greater Manchester. In my spare time, I like to do anything basically that gets me in the great outdoors. So when I'm not at conferences like this or working, I'm usually on the side of a hill somewhere in a sleeping bag, either hiking or cycling or climbing. I love it. I'm also the proud owner of two extremely mischievous and naughty bunny rabbits. If we've got any other rabbit owners in the audience, I'd love to hear from you. And in my professional life, I work at Top Desk. I'm a consultant and an agile coach. So I kind of split my role between the two. As a consultant, I work with different companies, sort of directly consulting and advising on service management, implementing change projects, looking at the people, the process, and the tools that will kind of bring success to their projects. And my passion throughout consultancy had always been the people and culture side. It just kind of naturally lent myself to that way more, which involved eventually kind of specializing in that area to become an agile coach, because the focus there is so much on the people and culture and the kind of ways of working as well. And in that role, what I've done recently is helped Top Desk actually internally go through an agile transition. So Top Desk Global is working to be an agile organization, and I've helped to be one of those kind of driving forces in the UK to help us get there, which has involved a few different things. It involves obviously kind of looking at the leadership style and addressing those aspects of change and looking at how we can look at servant leadership, which we're going to talk about a little bit later today as well. But also kind of coaching and supporting the teams so that this new ways of working and improvements, they actually become like a habit and like a mindset that sticks, rather than kind of we do it for a little bit then forget about it. So it's these experiences and these kind of insights in the people and culture and the hero mentality that I'd like to share with you today. So what are we going to talk about? I'm going to split this presentation into kind of three main areas. First of all, we're going to sort of lift the mask on hero culture, understand what it is, what are the hallmarks, what are the pros, what are the cons, and then we're going to deep dive into two specific areas of where you can combat the negative effects of hero culture. So within teamwork, by building highly effective teams, and within leadership as well. And rather than give sort of one big chunk for all of the questions at the end, I thought we'd try something a little bit different. Throughout the presentation, you'll see it will appear this slide asking for question and comments, I believe kind of 3 times throughout the presentation. So if you do have a question, please, please, please do put it in the chat box as we go along. It doesn't just have to be a question, it can be just a comment or an idea, or maybe something resonated with you, or maybe you completely disagree. Please pop it in the chat. I'd love to hear from it. And then whenever you see this slide at various points during the presentation, we'll have a chat about it and we'll address those. So without further ado, hero culture. What is it? What does it actually mean? Well, I'm actually going to shamelessly steal a really good quote that summarizes what the hero culture is. It's from James Proctor, who's written some extensive blogs on the subject, which are definitely worth checking out. They're very good. He says that hero culture is an organization or a functional area of the organization that's run by a group of hardworking, highly talented heroes on sheer strength, will, and knowledge. And in some organizations, value is placed on these individual contributions of specific heroes. They save the day because they put out the biggest fire, or they have the most extensive knowledge, or they do the biggest, most impressive thing, or work the longest hours. Heroes are usually very hardworking, highly talented, and as it says, working on sheer strength, will, and knowledge. The organization's heroes, they put in the long hours to get the job done, because sometimes in their minds, and certainly in the minds of some others in the organization, they might be the only ones who have that knowledge, who have that experience or training or skills to get the job done. And sometimes you'll see that if you have an organization, sometimes you see it with startups actually, where there's rapid growth and very quick success. A lot of the time it's characterized by a very small set of heroes, without which the fires would be ablazing. And for some organizations, it becomes the cultural norm. It becomes a kind of dominant way of working, and almost seen as a sign of good leadership, where people are praised and lionized and promoted on their ability to resolve the recurring crisis and put out all the fires. And on the face of it, hero culture doesn't sound like such a bad thing, right? There are some very apparent pros, like we've already said, heroes are very knowledgeable, they're extremely hardworking, they have a great deal of stamina, they put out fires, which is great, and they actually feel quite good about themselves as well. It's a very nice feeling to save the day and be the one that figures out the solution to something. And these are typically qualities that we would want to praise and reward, right? For good reason. Who doesn't want someone who can put out a fire? But when this happens too often, and when this becomes dominant culture, well, that's when you start to see the true reality of a hero culture, and it's not actually quite as good as it seems. So let's explore these pros in a little bit more detail, starting off with the top one, the fact that heroes are knowledgeable. Heroes definitely do have the knowledge, but this knowledge is largely known to them only and to other heroes in their tribe. It is kind of tribal knowledge in a way, passed between heroes or possibly even just kept to themselves. It's not something that's usually shared widely. Heroes do have this habit of kind of keeping the way they do things or their expertise in a certain area to themselves, and rarely will they spend the time transferring that knowledge and skills to others. So that expertise and that knowledge can't be easily replicated or put to good use by other people. They don't generally develop other team members' skills or share those valuable experiences and insights. And often this is because of time. It's not as if they're bad, horrible people. It's just very time consuming sharing knowledge. And if you're the one putting out the fires all the time and putting in the long hours, you're not going to have very much time for it. It could be completely inadvertent behavior, not purposeful at all. But you might also see that some heroes subconsciously do quite like being the hero. They'll be rewarded for it, and they don't want to necessarily lose that limelight or success that they have. In some cultures, it might even be purposeful behavior. This kind of cultural behavior is quite dangerous. It can be damaging to the company because you can't scale without that knowledge or without that person's input. And if you do find that this purposeful behavior of keeping knowledge like within one person and not wanting to share happens, it could be a sign of a lack of safety within the team. It could be that they don't feel in a safe environment to share what they know, because they feel that it's kind of giving away something that makes them valuable to the business. It's actually can end up being a bit of a vicious cycle, actually. People kind of keeping themselves the expert, not transferring knowledge, and kind of keeping that perpetuation. And it can damage the ability to scale, to grow, and to mature as a business. We already mentioned that heroes are incredibly hardworking and have good stamina, but even heroes have got their limits. Hero culture breeds very hardworking individuals. It has to. If you're going to be the ones put out the big fires or bring out the big guns, you've got to put in the hours, the long hours, repeatedly to fix the things that go wrong. Because, of course, you want to stay the hero. It's addictive. You're rewarded for it, likely by your team leads. You want to keep going and pushing and going. After all, business just depending on you, right? You're the one to save the day. It's a lot of pressure. And no matter how brilliant, how hardworking, how heroic an employee might be, no human can keep up this kind of driving themselves to the bone pace forever. And usually, without fail, the hero either realizes they have to slow down, or they develop some sort of stress related illness, or they experience disastrous effects to their personal lives, or possibly all three at once, all the while being rewarded for those efforts. Again, it's another vicious cycle. The more you're the hero, the more you have to be the hero, and the harder it is for you to stop and for your team to want you to stop as well. And it's not fun to be constantly on call. Like, yes, there's like the adrenaline and the temporary highs, but always fighting those fires and never having a chance to really take a deep breath, it's actually not that much fun for the heroes either. And crucially, it's not sustainable. Which leads on to the last point, that not everybody can be a hero. The very definition of the word, I'm sure you realize, means that it's not something that everyone can necessarily achieve. It's an elite position that only a few can live up to. And cultures that overly reward heroic behavior work on the assumption that everyone should aspire to reach these lofty heights. But by definition, if everybody is, then no one is. And this leads to quite an elitist kind of culture and way of working, where certain people get the lion's share of attention and rewards, and other people feel that they can't measure up and it's an impossible standard and there's no room for them. It can be quite demoralizing for the team as a whole. Heroism is not very inclusive. And to put this another way, it can be a huge barrier to collaboration and to teamwork. So although the hero mentality might look like this on the outset, when it becomes the dominant culture, it actually ends up looking like this. It can be very isolating. There's a lot of examples of knowledge hoarding. People get burnt out. It's not sustainable, scalable, and you have a lot of value placed on a small number of individuals rather than the team as a whole. So once you unmask it, hero culture is not that great. It's a bit like those Scooby-Doo episodes where you pull the mask off of the guy at the end, and it's just not who you thought it was at all. It's actually something that we want to avoid if possible. And ask yourself, does this sound like the kind of company that you would want to work in? Is this somewhere where you could see you spending your time, spending your career? Well, next we're going to deep dive into some of the alternatives to this culture and how you can have a different mentality. But first, I wondered if we already had any questions or comments from anyone in the audience. Don't know if there's any come through at all, Kylie.
Oh, there absolutely has been, actually. It's quite amusing. Your
Awesome.
um your comment about what happens to the cities after the hero is swept through and saved the day has really struck a chord, actually. And in fact, somebody has said, for the nerdy amongst us, there is a series of comics in Marvel called Damage Control, that covers the rebuilding of cities after the fights and all the issues around who would pay for it, what happened to those killed, injured, etc. So actually, Jason, who's the person who made the comment, has very kindly put a link in the chat box, which I will then now just send to the entire audience, so that if
That
anybody
is
else
awesome.
is interested,
I
then
love that.
so yeah, it's great, isn't it? Of course, there is a series of comics about the post
The rebuilding.
the
Oh, I'm
rebuilding. I mean, of
definitely going to
course there
check that out.
is. Fantastic. Um, so a couple of other comments. So one of our commenters is, I call him cynical, he says, but in his opinion, he thinks sometimes people are deliberately careless just so that they can play the hero at 3 a.m. and have all of those rewards. Um, and then on the flip side of that, the same company that will give all those rewards to somebody who does that 3 a.m. stint can potentially see somebody who does everything right and goes home at 5 p.m. as being almost slightly disloyal, because they're not being a hero. So I, it's quite a hard thing to say, but so I don't. Does
Yeah.
that sort of reflect your sense of what happens
It
sometimes?
it can happen, definitely. I must admit, the majority of times that I see it happening, it is coming from a good place. It is people just really wanting to, step in and solve
Mm,
something. But it can happen that there is that deliberative, putting yourself in a situation where you will become the hero because there are those rewards. And in some ways, I feel like you can't really blame those people, because if they're getting something from it, and they're being told this is actually what we value and this is a good thing for you to do, then you kind of see how it would creep into that in a way.
mm,
And it must be pretty horrible then for the people who are leaving at 5 and getting the job done to a good standard to not have that same level of recognition. It's quite
absolutely.
tough.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so somebody else says, a big issue I see is that managers say the right things about hero culture, but in practice, they really only notice and respect heroes.
Yeah, yeah. It's managers have got a tough job in that regard. I will speak about it a little bit later, but we almost kind of expect managers to be the heroes and to therefore reward those things as well. It's almost part of their job description, and I do
Mm,
think team leaders have a really important role to actively combat that, because it doesn't come naturally. You naturally want, oh yeah, you sold something great. You put in a long
mm,
hours. Thank you so much, and we're going to reward that. You almost have to kind of counteract that and be quite determined with your steps to do that.
mm. So is there a sense as well that companies who promote getting things done as a competency, does that sort of enforce and reinforce that behavior, or is that
I think it depends on how they're promoting those things to get like
right?
how they're going about that, because at no point will we ever say that you shouldn't get things done, that you shouldn't be productive, that your team
Yeah.
shouldn't have results. It's more at like, what cost are you willing to promote that, and are you also, putting the productivity of your people first, but also
Mm,
their well-being as well, and rewarding them for things like their collaboration efforts,
mm,
like the steps they take to avoid the fires. It needs to be all of those things that are valued and taken into consideration. If it is just singularly the kind of very metric result driven, yeah, it can push people into the hero culture quite quickly.
mm. And actually, a thought that I had was, does it have can it have a tendency to create bullying cultures as well?
I think it can, and I've seen it before where it's like then no one kind of actively bullies, purposely going to bully, but if it's more the case that they become these kind of ultimate lionized environments where they're very kind of harsh environments, very unforgiving, and people who don't kind of fit into that, so they can be quite ostracized.
Mm.
and the heroes will then can almost be quite disrespectful in some ways to those kind of people. So yeah, it's not somewhere where a lot of people want to work, but a lot of companies do have that culture.
Yeah, yeah. There's more points coming in, and I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'm just going to raise one more point. But you've really actually triggered some really interesting conversations amongst all the organisers and panelists, actually, amongst the committee. So those sorts of comments we potentially, guys, should be addressing to the entire audience so people can see them in the chat as well, because they're really interesting comments. So Richard has raised the gender point, which I sort of tossed in briefly right at the beginning. Do you see a difference between men and women's contribution to hero culture and the effect on the two different genders and
Oh,
non-genders, obviously?
such a good question. I haven't actually included that kind of analysis or anything on that in the presentation itself. It is something I would like to explore in a bit more detail, actually, because I don't know whether it is my own assumptions that you do tend to see more heroes as kind of men being the savior and stepping in, or whether that is an assumption, whether that doesn't happen at all. Um, I basically, that's something I'd love to know more about. I don't have a huge amount of insight on that yet. I have my own assumptions, but whether they're right or not,
Yeah.
I couldn't say.
And of course, um, working in quite a male-dominated industry, it's natural
Yeah,
that the majority of people that you see doing anything are going to be men. So in
yeah,
fact, you possibly need to go to, say, HR or
yeah,
to primary schools where you have female dominated cultures to
yeah,
see if the hero mentality, to try and
definitely.
balance out your assessment over where that assumption sits, because I think, naturally we're going to see more heroes, male heroes, in IT, just because
Yeah,
there are more men in IT. So yeah.
exactly. That is very true and could be happening. But I do know that something that you do see a lot of where there are hero cultures, you see the people who aren't heroes. And this is something that I know a lot of women suffer with, is having like
Mm.
imposter syndrome, kind of being like, oh,
Yeah,
I shouldn't be here,
right.
I shouldn't be doing that. And hero culture can inadvertently foster that, because you've got those people who can't step up and being like, oh no, it's not for me, I shouldn't be doing this, or I don't know how, and actually they could be perfectly capable of doing it. So
Yeah,
I don't think it's a good culture for, well, for any men or women really. But if you are someone who suffers with imposter syndrome, it can be quite uncomfortable.
that's a really good point. Really interesting. Right. Do you want to? There's so many more comments and things coming in, um, but let's move on because I'm a bit conscious of time. So
Sure. Well, there'll be at the end of the highly effective team section and at the end of the leadership section, there's time for more questions as well. So I'm hoping we can talk some more about those. But
cool.
for now, let's paint a slightly different picture. Let's look, instead of a place with a few outstanding, potentially very exhausted heroes, let's look at another alternative, which is a thriving and collaborative team. Whilst there are many qualities necessary for highly effective and thriving teams, there are two components I wanted to mention today because they actively work against hero culture developing. The first one is transparency. Highly effective teams are always transparent, and I feel like the word transparency gets thrown around a lot, so I thought we could describe a little bit more about what we actually mean with transparency. Transparency means all team members communicating openly, honestly, and freely, and creating a flow of information between individuals that kind of knits the team together. Transparency doesn't mean broadcasting every single minute, tiny task or step or email reply, but it does mean proactively communicating key things like large decisions or moments that affect multiple people. The more important the communication, the more channels used to communicate it. But for smaller tasks and updates, you don't need to do a massive broadcast if it's not necessary. But what you can do for those is provide a platform where people can find that information and ask questions about it if they need to. It's almost like proactive transparency. And there are some practical tips on how you can do this. Something that we started doing at Top Desk is we started building in for all the teams very short, regular team updates. And you may be thinking, more meetings? Is that really what we need right now? Like, I already have so many meetings, and now you're introducing team updates, regular team updates at that. Well, the key word there is short, regular team updates. And actually, what we do is we keep ours at 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. So a 5 to 10 minute meeting. Some teams will do one in the morning and one in the afternoon. They call it rolling in and rolling out. So you start the day with a roll in with your team members and you finish with a roll out. 2 5-minute meetings every single day. And each of these meetings has a very clear structure so that you keep to time. Everybody goes into the meeting knowing what's going to be said. And the structure is this: that each person answers 3 questions. What are you working on, or what are you doing? What are you going to do? And do you need any help, or can you offer any help? So 3 clear things where you can say, right, I've done ABC. Today I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I don't need any help, but I'm moving a bit quicker than I thought, so I can offer to help someone if they need be. And that's all that happens in those updates. If off the back of those, then a further conversation is needed, then you can always kind of connect those 2 people who need a more kind of in-depth discussion after that meeting. But it keeps everyone abreast of what's going on with those short regular team updates. Another thing that you can do, which we found to be quite successful to help with transparency, is to use a transparent platform for key information. For example, a Kanban board. A Kanban is great because it makes really clear not only what tasks are being done, but also who's working on them and where they are in their life cycle as well. I'm a big fan of having these Kanbans as actually a physical board up in the office, because then when you have your roll in and roll out meetings, you can actually stand around the board for them as well, which is quite nice. And you can accidentally be quite transparent just because you can have other people join that meeting with you and stand around the board with you, or perhaps overhear what's going on. Obviously, unfortunately, where we are at the moment, what we've had to do is a lot of our physical boards we've replaced with virtual boards so that we can all work from home, but they're still very effective to have a virtual Kanban as well. And it helps because it helps highlight issues early. The way Kanban works, you can see where things are in their life cycle and see when you're going to reach bottlenecks, see when the work is piling up, when you've got too much in progress, for example, where the sparks are that could cause fires can be spotted early, and they'll be able to be dealt with resources from the whole team rather than the hero, because everyone's kind of communicating about where they are and what's happening. Also really helps knowledge sharing as well. You do have to put the effort in to make such open transparency. Like, these kind of roll in, roll outs don't organize them themselves. The Kanban board doesn't create itself, but it is so worth it for the kind of level of visibility and improved communication that you can have between the team. And actually, once you start it and it kind of becomes embedded, it just becomes normal, and it really doesn't feel like any effort at all once it becomes habit for the team. The second area is feedback. Now, this is important because there's little point working transparently in your team if no one's able to give feedback on the things that they're seeing from the transparency. It's like all this transparency for nothing. An example of this could be, say that you do start doing roll in and roll out meetings, and you start using a Kanban board, your team's making real progress, but you see something that's going to go wrong. You see a spark that could start a fire. You could see maybe the hero taking on too much, or the in progress work piling up, or things going wrong, and you spot it, but you don't give that feedback. Then you're losing the benefits of what that transparency can bring in the first place. And I'll be honest, feedback isn't easy, especially for us in the UK. I don't know if you guys struggle with this as well, but it's tough to give like a negative opinion. You feel like you're kind of saying something very damaging to a person, even though it could be one of the most the helpful things you can do for them. Feedback's something we really struggled with our offices in the UK. Actually, we knew we had to do something about it, and we took taking feedback very seriously. So we implemented feedback training. We trained everybody in all of the offices across the UK on how to give and how to receive feedback. We provided a structure for that feedback and a place where people could practice as well, like actually practice giving positive reinforcement feedback and practice giving improvement feedback as well. We also hold regular meetings about once a month with a team. It depends how often the team meet as to how regularly you do it. But the purpose of that meeting is specifically to give feedback to one another. So what you're discussing in that meeting is not what you've achieved in that month as a team or what you're working on, but it's how you worked together. How did you collaborate? We call these meetings retrospectives. They're kind of like an open, safe platform where you can talk to each other and give that feedback in a safe space. Another tip for feedback that you can do, and this is a really nice one that I've started doing in a lot of training sessions or in project meetings, is at the end of that meeting, spend 2 minutes to get everybody to write one thing down that they liked about the project or the training, whatever it is, and one thing that they lacked, and be very specific that they have to do one for each. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, I like this part and I like that part. We don't always feel as comfortable saying things that we lacked about a certain project or training or whatever it might be. We call it liked and lacked. It just says, oh, would everyone do your liked and lacked post-it notes? And it just becomes normal then to give that kind of feedback, and a really nice way to embed it. Giving and receiving feedback really is the hallmark of a mature team. It actively works against the hero culture because it focuses on how the team can work together and improve and solve things early, not just on how the individual can save the day by themselves. I do sometimes hear some critics on transparency and feedback, and I can understand that. It can be scary because it will often mean admitting mistakes, admitting when things go wrong, when you need help. It could highlight shortcomings in processes, in people. It means being able to make yourself vulnerable. And surely you might be thinking highlighting all these things is only going to make things worse. But the simple truth is that it's almost impossible to make any real improvement without feedback. And regular feedback and a culture of that feedback, it will boost trust, engagement, and it strengthens the bonds of a team. Positive feedback to people who are not the hero, so people maybe who have imposter syndrome and don't want to step in or feel that they're not valued. Positive feedback will help them to see their own value, and it empowers them to know that they are doing the right things and that their contribution is valued. And transparency on what's going on and feedback to heroes helps them see the bigger picture, helps them see the contributions of all those in the team. It also might highlight behaviors that they themselves didn't even know that they did, which can be extremely beneficial for them to know. So transparency and feedback, really big fans of those to kind of combat the hero culture in teams. I mentioned agile before and how we've kind of been transitioning to agile ways of working in Top Desk. But I wanted to share with you one of the principles of agile, which is essential to combat the hero culture. I've got the 4 principles of agile on the screen here. It's the top one, the very top one that hits home when it comes to the hero mentality, and it's called make people awesome. Sounds quite cheesy and American, but for me, it's one of the most strongest principles of agile. Make people awesome means optimizing your people first and not just focusing on the product, on the business, on the process. It means optimizing the people first. And people read that and they think, oh, that means the customers. We need to put the customers first. We need to do what they say. Customers always right. But it doesn't just mean the customers. It means you as well. It means your colleagues. It means your teammates. It means respecting them and respecting their health, their time, their knowledge, their contribution. And if you've got heroes burning out and working ridiculously long hours, that's not making them awesome, and it's not making the rest of the team awesome as well. We talked before about making it the company where you want to work at, and that's the kind of company that respects work-life balance and says, actually, it's not okay for someone to work ridiculous hours, and we're going to say, no, please don't do this. We're going to put our people first. And the scope of the things that our team can achieve takes into account the well-being of our people. The best thing about putting people first is it automatically trickles down to your customers as well. There was a study done by a research group called Temkin back in 2017, and they looked at the employee engagement of 5,000 people from different organizations. What they found was that the secret to their customers being happy was actually the happiness of their employees. And employees who were engaged, who were put first, who were made awesome, they played to their strengths at work, and they had a direct impact on customer satisfaction. It's almost like 2 halves of the same coin, where you've got an engaged employee on one side and a happy customer on the other. So it's actually, not just for the sake of your teammates that we're putting them first, but you will be amazed at the difference it can make to business as well. Another way that you can build a highly effective team is to know and leverage their strengths. By exploring the unique talents and strengths of each team member, you will unlock their potential to deliver their very best. It means leveraging all the people in their team based on their natural talents rather than relying on the stamina of an individual hero. And this is so much better in the long run. not only because it doesn't foster the hero culture, but because then your people are more happy and engaged because they're doing things that they like. They're more productive and they bring better results in the workplace. It's a fact. It's the study by Temkin Group has shown that how it rubs off onto their customers. There's a lot of other research out there by Forrester as well that proves that if you're using your employees to their natural talents, your team will work better, be more productive, and get better results. It's not always easy though to know what your skills and talents are. Some things you might know, you're like, oh yeah, I'm really clear on this, or I really know that this team member is good at that. But other things are a lot less tangible and quite hard to define. So we use a talent assessment called Strength Finder. You might have heard of it before. It works in a very similar way to a lot of personality tests or psychometric tests, where you take a kind of a long quiz or questionnaire, I suppose I should call it, and it will tell you things. Specifically, why this one is good is because it gives you tangible strengths that you're good at. And those strengths are split into 4 different domains. We've got executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. You can see some of the strengths are on the board there. Why I think this particular psychometric testing is good is because it doesn't just give you one box that you're in. I know sometimes you take a test, it's like, oh, you're introvert or extrovert, and it's kind of like one extreme or the other. What the Strength Finder does is it actually says, okay, here are your top 5 strengths, and they might be from all sorts of different domains. You might have one in all 4 of those different areas. You might have 3 in one and 1 in the other. It's a very broad view, but it's also very tangible as well. You're given an exact thing that plays to your strength, a natural talent that you had, and gives you ideas on how you can leverage it as well. And when you've got a team of individuals who knows their strengths and knows where they excel, then there's no room for the hero to emerge because everybody is engaged and everybody has a role to play and are accountable and to use their talents for the best of the team. I've got an illustration here to kind of show what that looks like. We already spoke about heroes' strengths. Obviously, they're very hardworking, they have great stamina. They might have strengths such as being extremely responsible, maybe quite competitive as well, all leading to an optimized but very burnt out hero that can only do so much. Contrast this with a team where you have a whole host of different skill sets. Now, I've just picked some random ones here. This is not an exact science of you need these skills to be a good team, not at all. It's more just like a mix of skills. And when the team knows its strengths, you're utilizing so much of a broader skill set where everybody's bringing something different and something precious to that team. And that team will be more productive, more efficient, more happier than the lone hero. And ultimately, they're going to produce better results in the long run without having to stay up till 3 a.m. to get the job done. So look at your own teams, not just the teams you lead if you're a manager, but also the teams that you're part of too, so your own management team, for example. And do an exercise to map out your own strengths. I've put a screenshot here of how you can do it with post-it notes and kind of put your top 5 in and see the spread of strengths in the team. Something important, this is not about recruitment. This is not about finding the skills that are missing at all. All of your employees have skills and have strengths, and it could be one of the biggest resources that we're not leveraging. Maybe you've got someone who is a talent for being an arranger. Arrangers are people who are excellent at managing all of the variables in a complex situation. They're very useful team members if you've got a complicated project with lots going on. They're very good at multitasking. What kind of challenges could you give to an arranger in your team to really bring out that strength in them? Perhaps you have somebody whose strength is aptly named woo. Woo is brilliant because people who have the strength for woo, they are really good at winning people over. They thrive on conversations and talking to people. Put someone with woo in a conversation with a difficult customer or in an awkward situation, and somehow they manage to turn the whole thing around, and that difficult customer suddenly becomes an advocate and the conversation is great. I don't know how they do it. It's literally just this natural thing that they do. So teams that know their strengths like this, they are inclusive, they're collaborative, they're strong. There's no room for the hero to emerge because they're all on a level playing field, knowing what they're good at and leveraging those strengths. So you've got no hero culture, you'll have happy employees, a motivated and highly effective team. That kind of sounds a lot more like the company that I would like to work for personally. Now, I mentioned Strength Finder. I've popped the URL at the bottom of the screen there for Strength Finder. It's from Gallup. You do have to pay a certain amount for each test that you take, depending on the size of your team. So if you didn't necessarily want to embark straight on spending that much money, there are some alternatives as well which are free. There's one called High Five Test. It's very similar to the Strength Finder. It gives you some kind of a list of the top 5 strengths that you get. It's just kind of much shorter questionnaire, a lot less in depth. And there's also a personality test called 16 Personalities. This one it gives you your strengths and talents as such. It's more of a kind of broader personality test, a bit like the ones we spoke about before, where you kind of introvert or extrovert, judging or sensing, etc. But the analysis that they give you for that particular test is really in depth, and they do talk about skill sets that come with that personality type, and there's a lot you can learn from there as well, and it's free as well, so that's another good one to try out. So I've spoken already again for quite a while. I was wondering, Kylie, do we have any more questions or comments at this point? Kylie, I don't know if you're there or speaking, but I must admit I can't hear you right now.
Sorry, I remembered to turn the video button on this time, but not the mute button off. Right, so the first question is from Kaz, and she says, or she asks, how do you actually get a hero to let go?
What a question. Yeah, it's a good one because part of it is to do with leadership of the team lead of that hero has, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. What I do find with heroes is that what they crave is the recognition and the reward and the doing the good job. And they can find that from other places, not just the 3 a.m. burnout. If it's become part of your culture, that is the normal way that the hero manifests the good work they do, and that's the only way they know to find it. Whereas there are other things that we can reward them for, like being a really good collaborator, like running a training session that spreads their expertise. Um, Maybe they're working on giving and receiving feedback, and that's really hard for that hero because taking sort of negative feedback isn't something that comes naturally to them. We can start praising and rewarding them for that. Doesn't come easy straight away. It will feel like quite like it grates a little bit because it's against the norm. But it can over time make a difference to a hero so that they still feel that they're being rewarded and that they're doing a good job, but it's coming from a different place.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And Kaz has added, especially if they're the manager or the team leader.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
definitely.
yeah. So the next question is from Robert, and it's more, and actually it's a nice question to segue into the way we're currently working now. So Robert says, how do morning and evening meetings work around a flexible working environment when your teams start and finish at different times of the day?
Very good question. And the answer to that is it's up to the team. Um, I mentioned very briefly about teams being self-organized as a way to kind of be really accountable and responsible for their results. Actually, I don't know if we have talked about self-organizing teams yet. I think that comes in the next section.
Right.
Self-organizing teams. A self-organizing team takes into account the timings and workings of all of the team. And if you do have people working maybe in different time zones, maybe you're spread across different areas of the globe, it is up to that team to decide how can we find a way to roll in and roll out that works for everybody so that the person in Australia doesn't have to get up at midnight to do the roll in roll out, and there's going to have to be some compromise. It might be that you only have one meeting a day instead of two. It might be that if there is occasions where not everyone can make the update, then you just do a quick voice note on your phone or on your laptop of what your update is, and that can be played to the rest of the team. um, it's about finding what will work for everybody and making sure that the team comes up with that solution themselves and that everybody's happy with it, rather than being told you must come to this certain thing at this certain time, or have a lot of resistance otherwise.
Fantastic. So Jason has said, talking about roll-ins and rolls-outs, and referring back to the picture and your discussions around Kanban boards. So he says, when most people are now working remotely and not in the office, how do we manage that? Um, I think his personal observation is we lose a lot of our communication via remote tools, loss of body language, etc. So how have you any thoughts around how to work about that now that we're all remote?
It's a really good point. We're still struggling and working our way through that ourselves as an organisation as well. What we've discovered since working remotely is how much we thrive on like face-to-face culture. Yeah, it's I don't have a like magic wand for that, unfortunately, but there are little things that you can do. We have like for example, for ages no one used their Kanban board at all because it was in the physical office, and even though they've made them digitally, it wasn't front of people's minds to refer to them the same way because they're just not in front of you like that. So we kind
Mm,
of had to make this active choice whenever you start your roll in meeting. Whoever the host of that meeting is, maybe it's the same person every time, maybe you roll it around to each person depending on how the team works. They always open with the Kanban. They always share their screen straight away. So when people join the meeting, you're looking straight at the Kanban like you
mm,
would be if you were on your desks together. We've also actually increased the amount of they're not really team building exercises specifically, but more like um, social offline things that the teams do and make it acceptable for them to totally fine to happen in working hours. So
mm.
if you want to have like a beer with your team, a virtual beer on the Friday, and put in an hour for that, that's actually encouraged. So you do get that kind of social aspect back. And you're connecting with your team because normally you just do that in the office without thinking because you'd be sitting next to them or opposite them and you'd catch up about your day or what's happening in your life. So we had to build in structure for that to happen, which at first feels quite artificial, but eventually it just becomes normal. Like, oh yeah, going for my 4 o'clock beer with my team could be quite nice.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I, I mean, I'm independent, so I've worked from home for 90% of my time, and I work in a lot of ad hoc teams. But my partner works in a permanent role in a treasury team, so he's got that very strong sense of team. And just from how he's been working, it feels like they've been putting in place structures to allow people to communicate and to do team type activities, but it has felt, as you say, quite artificial. And I get the sense that actually I don't know that they are becoming normalized in the way that you've just said. So it is interesting that if you keep going and keep making that effort, your experience is it has become normalized and just natural thing to do.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if it's maybe just a one-off or if it's just because we've put
Mm,
in the just done it so much that it does feel normal. But we
yeah.
used to have so the team that I'm part of within Top Desk, we call ourselves the Owls. Long story behind that. And we built in these catch-ups, so called social catch-ups, 3 times a week at 4 o'clock on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They were completely optional. You didn't have to go if you didn't want to, but if you had time, you could go there and people could catch up together. And at the start, you're right, they felt so artificial. But now it's like no one wants to miss it. You end up going there and everyone's just chatting about really nice stuff. Sometimes it's work related chat, sometimes it's completely social related chat. I don't know when the flick switched, but at one point it did, and it did take a while. So it might just be
Mm,
perseverance, it might be just the frequency of them,
yeah.
but it can
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah. Interesting. So, on that topic, actually, we've got another question from David. Who says he's concerned about hidden culture, especially now. So, we all work in teams or teams of teams at home, but some people, some managers, maybe a few key workers, meet face to face socially, but socially distance. So, I guess there's that concern that if that's happening at the local golf club, or
Mm,
if people are going into the office, but people who don't feel they want to go into the office don't get into
yeah,
the office, then you sort of go back to that scenario of being privileged where some people are meeting face to face, having privileged conversations, decisions are being made. And actually, somebody else
yeah,
has commented as well, similarly along those lines, that actually is this how do we replace the smoke break? It's sort of that used to happen in the smokers with all the
yeah,
smokers going out as well. So, it is, I guess it's not a new issue, but that's something still to bear in mind.
definitely. I remember that it was seeing that at companies before the whole pandemic where massive decisions were made like at the bar on a Friday after
Yeah.
work where there'd just be a few of them having a few drinks and they'd talk about all these things, and if you were someone who'd actually gone home, you missed out on the opportunity to be part of that. um, I think it's really closely tied to the culture of a company, that, and whether you do take decisions and chats like that sort of offline quite a lot. if you are someone then that can come into the office, someone else is coming to the office as well. Maybe you've got like a staggered rota of your desk spaces. I think it's more likely that that is going to happen now in COVID times because you're just going to have fewer people face to face. Um, for me personally, I think that's where our leadership and our management comes in, to be
Mm.
really conscious of when that could be happening, and if maybe there are some people who aren't at the table, and to kind of stop those conversations. Hang on a second, let's widen the ballpark for this. Let's bring in these people. Let's book a chat with X, Y, and Z, and not have this kind of spontaneous chat about it, or have it, but be aware that it's not the defining chat or the key decision point, and that there's more people to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, there's more questions coming in, but I'll leave them because again we've got time as an issue. So do you want to go on with the leadership section?
Yes. Yes, this is, you'll be pleased to know, the final part of the presentation, talking about leadership. So, a traditional leadership style subconsciously, I believe, promotes hero culture without even meaning to. And there are some things that we can do to make sure this doesn't happen. Team leaders have actually got a really strong role to play. They've kept coming up again and again in our questions and in our presentation today because of how important they are in dismantling the hero culture. And it largely has to do with how leaders show what they truly value, therefore what they reward to their teams. And we spoke about knowledge hoarding right at the start, and how sometimes people kind of try to keep themselves being a hero, put them in a position by keeping information to themselves, or even, as someone suggested on the chat, kind of doing something that they know will result in them having to stay up late to fix it, because they're being rewarded for this. Their individual contribution is being noticed and valued. So even though sharing their knowledge is a better benefit for the rest of the team, there's not that incentive for them to do so. So if you are a team lead or a manager, think to yourself, what are you rewarding? Do you place value and emphasis on the importance for collaboration just as much as individual contribution? And looking at somebody's individual contribution is undoubtedly very important. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that at all. It's needed for personal development. Team leaders benefit from understanding performance on a person-to-person basis, and without this, we wouldn't know how to improve. We wouldn't know where we're lacking, or if we're, happy with what we're doing. But often, it's that individual perspective only that completely misses the wider picture of how that person collaborates and what they bring to the whole team and to the whole organization. It's vital that we create value, and we reward collaboration as well. So create value for, or show that we value collaboration. And it can be like really big things, but it can also be tiny day-to-day things that we show that we value to do with collaboration. Maybe someone in your team shared knowledge, or they conducted a training session, or they collaborated on a project which they might not have done before, or they made a real effort on being transparent on something which took them time out of their busy schedule, but they did it because they know in the long run it's going to reduce the heroic effort that they need. Maybe they gave feedback, even though it was really hard for them to open up and make themselves vulnerable. These are things that us as team leads, we can look out for and notice and value these behaviors, recognize and praise them. Sometimes you can even set targets for these, for individual people based on their collaboration. So, for example, we're going to set this person a challenge to run a training session on what to do if X happens, or attend a training session run by someone else. Or you can ask them to delegate X amount of their things that they're working on, or maybe reduce the scope of what they're doing, or challenge them to give feedback to X number of people. There are all sorts of kind of creative measurements and targets that we can give to people, we can use with our teams to measure how they're progressing on collaboration. Now, I fully admit that reviewing somebody based on their collaboration or based on their willingness to learn isn't tangible in the same way that X number of hours worked is. Um, Sometimes it does mean using non-tangible metrics, and that is just the nature of the beast. And it's not a case of sort of ignoring the tangible metrics and only using non-tangible, or vice versa. It's about looking at them alongside each other. That's how we combat the hero mentality, looking at individual achievement and collaboration, and valuing both. Team leaders really must bring that mentality into their everyday language. So if you're having catch-ups, if you're having appraisals, if you're giving feedback to your team members, remember not just focusing on those tangible metrics, but also the wider collaboration picture as well. And it goes without saying that leaders also need to lead by example in this regard and not be the hero themselves. It came up on one of the earlier questions, I believe, about kind of the management. It is almost expected of them to be the heroes. We want them to swoop in and save the day when something's going wrong. We confide in them with our issues, knowing that they can solve a problem. You hear phrases around the workplace. It's like, oh, that's not my responsibility. That's my boss's. It's kind of above my pay grade kind of thing. The hero mentality is something we always look for in a boss. It's the status quo that the leader comes first, they lead the way, and your people follow behind. And team leaders, they can embrace the hero mentality because it can give satisfaction to be all the one with all the answers that people come to for advice. And a leader who's embraced the hero mentality isn't necessarily an arrogant person. It's actually quite the opposite. Quite often they're trying to do the right thing for their team. They want to help their employees. They strive to solve conflicts to save the day and to put in the hours because it's on them. But the reality is that it can actually have quite a negative impact on the team. For example, you might find that your team experiences a lack of accountability and responsibility in their employees because they don't feel that they're responsible for their actions. It's with their leader. It's also detrimental for the managers themselves. There's a huge amount of expectation put on them because they're expected to step into problems that should and could have been resolved by the team, and this can stunt not only the team's growth, but also will be detrimental for the leaders themselves. So instead of riding like a knight into battle, it could be a time for management and team leaders to take a bit of a back seat and encourage teams to be mature, self-driven, and self-organized, which we were talking about in the questions earlier, self-organized teams. Okay, but how? We've discussed the concept of the hero mentality. Let's look at the alternative in leadership, which is also known as servant leadership. And servant leadership is a little bit different from sort of hero leadership. Heroes feel the need to be in charge and therefore talk a lot, whereas servant leaders are more prone to listening. They kind of sit back. They offer an opinion when worthy and can support and give advice to their employee, but they're very, very good listeners, and that's their primary role. A hero leader will take charge, make the employee feel controlled and restricted, and that they can't do the things that they need to or that they see there's a requirement for. Whereas a servant shares that power, shares responsibility, and consequently that helps with the team's growth and accountability. Heroes believe that all the burden is on them to make decisions, to be the one saying how it should be, whereas servant leaders understand that actually that's a responsibility that can be shared amongst the group. In fact, Simon Sinek, who speaks a lot about servant leadership, he compares it to looking after a plant, which I think is quite a nice example. Because servant leaders, they look at the plant and they take it for what it is, and they consider what are the plant's strengths, what are its weaknesses. Maybe it needs a lot of sunlight, maybe it needs not very much, maybe it needs lots of water, maybe it needs barely any water at all. And they look at those and they decide a suitable place for that plant to flourish, and they put it there. And that way, the responsibility for the care of the plant lies both for the servant leader, but also the plant, because the plant is the one that does the growth, that thrives, that looks amazing at the end of the day and should be rewarded. But the leader has understood how best to serve the plant by bringing out the best in it. Now, it's true, and it does need to be said that sometimes managers do need to step in and be the hero. So I honestly think that the best approach is a combined leadership style where the majority of the time you're utilizing servant leadership to create a safe and open environment for your team to thrive and self-organize, and they will learn to come with you for advice when needed, but ultimately they're responsible for solving problems as much as they can. But then being prepared to step in occasionally and be the hero when needed, because sometimes there will definitely be impediments that your team cannot remove for themselves. I'm hoping, though, that these should be few and far between. So to get started, you can ask yourself, what do my team need? If they were a plant, where would I put them? Where are they going to thrive? And am I enabling them to be their best self? Is there anything missing that I can provide for them? How can I help them? And embracing that servant leadership style, you'll see your teams will change slowly to become this accountable team that takes responsibility and that's driven to achieving results because they're their own results. If you get what I mean, they feel like they own them for themselves, not just for their boss. And then you'll find as well as a nice kind of result of that, you have more time and space for personal development because your team can specialize and grow in the areas that they enjoy. You as a team leader as well have more space to nurture your team and develop as a leader. So it can servant leadership, very big fan of this and actively works against the hero culture. So final note from me before we wrap up. It's okay to be the hero sometimes. I feel like this presentation does a huge amount of hero bashing, but it's not quite as black and white as that. Heroes are quite often coming from the best of places. The qualities of going the extra mile isn't something we want to put off. Often heroes have the natural talents of, being high energy, having a lot of stamina, a lot of passion. This passion could be used to inspire others too. But ultimately, what is damaging for organizations and for teams is hero culture when this becomes the dominant way that a few people are always the one saving the day. And you're missing the contribution from the rest of the team as well, who are also doing a great job. But at the same time, not putting somebody off. If they want to go the extra mile for a customer and be a hero for a customer, well, this is something commendable. And this is something that we do want to encourage. So as long as there are occasionally heroic efforts and it is not at the detriment to teamwork, collaboration, and of course, a healthy attitude to work, then I say full steam ahead. So to summarize, what have we talked about today? We have lifted the mask on what the hero culture can be like if it's your dominant culture, how you can see the negative effects of knowledge hoarding, burnout, and for business, it's not scalable and not something that you want to be part of. An alternative to this is to build a highly effective team where there is no room for heroic efforts because the whole team works together as a cog in your organization. And ways that you can do that and have this highly effective, mature team is to be transparent with what you're working on, give feedback off the back of that transparency as well, which is crucial, and knowing the strengths of your team so everybody has the opportunity to excel where they're naturally good. And finally, leadership. So actually kind of changing a bit our mindset on what we reward and what we put our metrics on and what we value as leaders so that we encourage collaboration over individual contribution, and servant leadership as an alternative management style as well to really help drive self-organized teams and people being motivated to achieve results. So in terms of next steps, if you are a team lead, think about how you can embody servant leadership and how you can change some of your metrics. If you are listening and you are part of a team, you can can start exploring for yourself what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what do you need from your team lead. If you were a plant and need placing somewhere, can you go and ask this of them and make it clear to them? Can you practice giving and receiving feedback as well? All things that you can try straight away as small steps to achieving a non-hero culture in your organization, and hopefully ultimately create a happy, healthy work environment that sees great results. So that was a wrap from everything for me, but I'm hoping we've got some more questions coming from our listeners. So Kylie, have we got any more coming?
Yes, actually, do you know what? I'm going to make a comment myself. I love your plant analogy, and I think I might start using it because I'm a keen gardener.
Brilliant. I can't take any credit for it. It wasn't mine at all. I stole it shamelessly, but I really liked it as well.
I don't know why I've not thought to use it before, actually. Do you know what? I've got 5 orchids sitting on my windowsill, and
Oh,
3 of them
amazing.
are about to start flowering. So it's nice. It's so satisfying to think I've done something right because there's that tangible evidence that what you're
Yeah.
doing to nurture something is allowing it to flourish like that. So it is such a lovely analogy. Um, so just going back to the comments, um, here's an interesting one. Do you see a role for team mentors, so external guides who can facilitate teams and speak truth to power if team building goes off piste?
Oh, so much.
I
Like,
thought you'd like that one.
yeah, really good one. Um, Especially that external vision, I think is really important. There's a that phrase, isn't there? Like if you're a fish in a river and a fishbowl, you can't taste the water you swim in. You don't know what your situation is, and sometimes having that kind of external mentor or coach come in can be really helpful. We had something like that here in the UK where we had someone come in. They weren't external to Top Desk UK, but they were external. They were external that they came from another office in our kind of global offices, and they came over and they helped us with our agile ways of working. And they had these insights that we'd never even thought of before,
Oh, interesting.
simply because you can't see your own situation very clearly when you're in it
Mm,
sometimes.
mm,
And the mentoring side of that, the coaching side of that, not that it's like, oh, initial training session, here's what you need to do, and then off you go, never see that person again. Actual kind of continued improvement, and either working one to one or one to team to look at issues and think about, all right, how can we work around this and solve these, was so beneficial. So yeah, big fan of
yeah.
that. If you can do something like that, would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I do you know what? I'm a coach myself, mostly informal to other IT asset managers, and I find it quite frustrating because my observation is a lot of people don't feel they can ask for coaching, whereas they feel that there's a training budget, so they can ask for training.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do feel that coaching is underrated.
So underrated, and I wish I could remember the name of the study, but I can't. I'll see if I can dig it out later. But they
That'd be
actually
great.
researched this, and they found that if you do a training session alone on something to increase productivity, I think productivity increased by like a couple of percent. Whereas if you did coaching on that area to increase productivity, it went up by like 82% or something like that, because
Wow.
coaching is so much more long lasting.
Yeah.
It stays with people, and it kind of isolates areas specific
Yes.
to teams and individuals that you just don't get from a training session.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. It's not always seen as very valuable, especially when
Yes.
budgets are concerned.
Yeah, if you could pull out that study, that'd be I'd be so grateful
I'll see if
actually.
I've
It'd be
definitely used
fantastic.
it in a presentation in the past, so I'll see if I can find it for you.
Yeah. So we've got another question just come in from Frank. Thank you, Frank. What's the best team size or sort of range of sizes to develop that self-organization culture?
Excellent question, because if you get too many people in the team, they're not effective and people get left out. If the team's too small, then you haven't got resource to play with. Um, it's not an exact science, I don't think. I have a ballpark of what I think is a good team size. I think probably if you speak to different people, they'll say different things. But for me personally, I find the minimum for a team to be self-organizing is three. Absolute minimum. Two isn't really a team anyway, because you're kind of just a pair. And then I don't think maximum you'd want more than 10. So between 3 and 10, hopefully somewhere in the middle is your ideal. You obviously, in the real world, you don't have the luxury of just being able to put everyone into groups of seven, something in the middle, for example.
Mm,
So what you can do is, if you do find that you have a team that is too big, so maybe you have like 20 people in a team, you can split them into sub teams, and then those sub teams, they might have very similar purposes because they've got the same overarching goal, but they're self-organized as two sub teams, for example, or three sub
right.
teams, depending on how you want to divide it.
Yeah. Great. So I think that's nearly it. Um, if there's anybody else has any last minute questions, please do pop them in the question box. Uh, Just a final point. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. Oh, here we are. So again, David also made a comment. For every pattern, there is an anti-pattern. So make people awesome could also be wrongly interpreted as encourage heroes because you're encouraging
Yeah,
the clearly awesome
yeah,
people. So he notes that it's vital that people are educated in the basics of the culture, or you get
yeah.
lip service rather than actual. So I guess my sense, I guess my own personal underlying question to that is, how do we inculcate those really fundamental layers? Is that training? Is it coaching? Is it just the leader really being focused on doing that? What are your thoughts?
I wish that I would to be able to say this one thing and then it would
You have no
work, but
magic wand.
there is no managed one. It's kind of all of those things, to be honest with you. From my personal experience, like going through such a big cultural organizational change and trying to drive that, if you do just focus on one area, it doesn't work. You have to kind of be as all encompassing as you can with the time and resource that you've got. And a good way that we found to do that was to we went into our kind of our transformation project and said, okay, what is the main aim of this that we want to achieve? We kind of split it into two goals. One was focused on the kind of people and culture side, and one was focused on the ways of working, and then sub-split
Mm,
that and prioritize that into things that needed to happen to achieve those goals. It took a lot of time to prioritize that list of things. Some was which was coaching ABC people, some of it was working on servant leadership, setting up regular management meetings, one was feedback training. There was so many different things that we could do. We didn't have the time to do all of them. So doing that prioritization exercise was really important to think about actually what is going to make the biggest difference, not just on the whole, but help us achieve these two main goals that we want to achieve out of this kind of transition that we're going through. And then kind of making those tough decisions of what you can and can't do. Yeah, but I do think you need to cover as many bases as you can, if I'm honest.
and just another quick question. So how long, what sort of timeline has that change been on? And I guess if you've reached a certain point, to what extent do you need to continue to be focused on continual improvement and on sort of adjusting and driving through that change constantly, or obviously the answer is no, but to what extent can you also just sort of think, right, we've changed the culture, that's great.
Yeah, you
Let's
you're right. So there's not like this kind of really perfect finish line, if you like,
mm,
where you're like, oh yeah, we've finished changing. I do think you're always kind of changing and improving. However, for the first year, it depends. I do think it depends on the size of your organization and how many either teams or maybe offices or maybe
yeah,
global branches that you're going through this transition. Obviously, the more that you include in that, the slower it takes.
yeah,
I do think it takes at least a year if you're talking about any kind of sizable office to kind of really get that embedded as a habit. So that is a year of intensive transformation work where you are
mm,
doing a lot of training, a lot of coaching,
yeah,
people feeling uncomfortable, especially for the first few months because they're like, oh, what is happening? I'm not familiar with this. And then after that year, you're still working, but you can kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit. The kind of momentum
right,
is already there a little bit.
yeah,
So that's the kind of position that we're in at the moment. So myself and we've got some fellow agile coaches within Top Desk. We're kind of isolating things like, oh, we need to do a little bit on that or like tweak that, but it's not the kind same levels of the extreme coaching and training that happens for the
mm,
first year.
mm, mm. So I think that's it in terms of questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add that you haven't, that sort of springs to mind as we close?
Nothing other than thank you for everyone for the great questions. It's been really nice to hear those and explore those in more detail. So
Mm.
yeah, nothing more from me.
Yeah, that is one of the nice things about doing a virtual conference like this, where we're not restricted to that very rigid sense of we've got to finish because we've got to vacate the room because we've got another presentation that needs to happen in this room. So it is really nice to be able to explore some of these questions and issues to a greater level than is possible in face to face, ironically.
Yeah, yeah, it is good. I did feel a bit bad for running over quite significantly, but hopefully if the questions are coming in, I'm hoping at least it brings some value as well.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's been really great having you. Thank you so much. I don't know about anybody else, but I've been scribbling away myself with a couple of points that I'm definitely going to try and put into practice. So, and
Thank you so
you
much for
can't
having
ask for
me as
more
well.
than that. Right. So, thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you, everybody who's been listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. We have been recording this, and so we will get it edited and released in the next few weeks because the BCS is doing a lot remote at the moment, so the editing process is sort of taking a couple of weeks, but we'll let you all know when it's been released. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day, and hopefully we'll see you later today at some of the other sessions.